The porch life had nearly given up by the time Caleb Rusk reached the last house on Birch Hollow Road. It swung in the wind above Elias Mercer's front steps, buzzing softly, throwing a tired yellow circle across the snow. Beyond that little circle, the world had gone blue and hard. The spruce trees stood with ice on their shoulders. The mailbox leaned toward the ditch like an old man listening for news. Caleb's breath fogged the glass of his mail truck before he even stepped out. He had come with nothing special in his canvas bag that afternoon. 2 grocery flyers, a heating bill, a small envelope from Elias's sister in Bangor, the kind she sent every other Thursday with neat handwriting and a pressed flower sticker on the flap. Then Caleb heard the sound. Not a cry, not exactly. A thin scrape came from the porch, followed by a faint, uneven breath. He stopped with one boot on the packed snow beside the walkway. For a second, he thought the wind had pushed the loose screen door again. Elias had meant to fix that door since October, and Caleb had teased him about it more than once. But the screen door was still. The broken porch step, the one with the silver nail head showing, held its usual cap of snow. The sound came again. Caleb turned toward the old wooden crate near the porch rail. It had not been there the day before. The crate was half buried in blown snow, with one side made of bent wire and the other patched with slats darkened by ice. At first glance it looked like something somebody had abandoned on the road, and Elias had dragged home out of habit. Elias was always rescuing things that had no proper use left. Bent lanterns, cracked mugs, a garden chair with one missing arm. He called it keeping company with the almost forgotten. But this was different. Something inside the crate shifted. Caleb forgot the mail in his hand. He forgot the cold moving through his gloves. He leaned forward, just enough for the porch light to catch 2 amber eyes behind the wire. For one long second, the mailman stopped breathing. Inside the crate, pressed low against a stiff blue blanket, was a bobcat. She was not large, not the way fear first made her seem. Her winter coat had once been thick and tawny, but it lay uneven now, clumped with frozen burrs and bits of porch straw. Dark spots broke across her shoulders like shadows under water. One ear, the left, had a torn edge near the tip. A pale line ran across the bridge of her muzzle, old enough to have healed, but clear enough to remember. Her eyes were wide, bright, and fixed on Caleb with the hard stillness of a wild creature deciding whether the world meant teeth or mercy. The bobcat's lips did not curl. She did not throw herself at the wire. She simply drew her paws beneath her body, gathered what little strength she had, and made herself smaller. That was what made Caleb's throat tighten. Not rage, not noise, just that terrible effort to disappear. "Elias," Caleb called, but his voice came out rough. The front door opened slowly, and Elias Mercer stood in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder and his reading glasses pushed up into his gray hair. He was 61, though winter made him look older when he forgot to stand straight. He wore a faded wool sweater with one cuff stretched loose, and the brown house slippers his late wife Marion had bought him 3 Christmases before she passed. In one hand, he held his chipped green mug. In the other, he held a spoon, as if he had been stirring soup and the world had interrupted him. "What is it?" Elias asked. Caleb only pointed. Elias looked at the crate. Then he looked again. The spoon slipped from his hand and landed in the snow with a soft, foolish sound. For a while, neither man moved. The wind moved for them. It lifted powder off the porch rail and pushed it across the boards in pale lines. Somewhere in the woods, a branch cracked under ice. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound, and her head turned slightly, not toward the men, but toward the dark spruce beyond the yard. She knew where the forest was. That was the first thing Elias noticed, and it troubled him more than the cold. She had not forgotten the direction of freedom. He stepped onto the porch, slow as old wood settling. The bobcat watched his feet, not his face, his feet. Every time his slipper brushed the boards, her whiskers trembled. One whisker on the right side was broken short, giving her muzzle a lopsided look that might have been almost comical if she had not been so still. "Who left you here?" Elias whispered. Caleb swallowed. "I thought the crate was empty." "You didn't put it there." Elias shook his head. The bobcat shifted again, favoring her right side. The blue blanket beneath her had frozen along one corner, stiff as cardboard. Elias saw that and felt something inside him turn carefully, painfully, the way it had turned when he first came downstairs after Marion's funeral and found her gardening gloves by the back door. A small abandoned thing could make the whole house ache. He did not reach for the crate. He had worked enough years as postmaster to know that panic traveled faster than kindness. Instead, he crouched 3 feet away from the wire, not close enough to threaten, not far enough to pretend he had not seen. The porch boards creaked beneath his knees. The bobcat's pupils narrowed. "All right," Elias said softly. "No grabbing, no foolishness." Caleb gave a nervous little laugh, then pressed his lips together as if laughter might offend her. His mailbag slid down his shoulder and bumped his knee. The bobcat flicked one ear at the sound. She seemed to dislike the mailbag immediately, with the stern judgment of a church lady disapproving of muddy boots. That tiny thing, that sharp little ear flick, loosened something in Caleb's chest. "She's got opinions," he murmured. Elias did not smile, but his eyes warmed. "Most ladies do." The bobcat blinked once, slow from exhaustion rather than trust, and lowered her chin toward the blanket. Inside the house, the old radiator clicked. A pot simmered on the stove. The smell of potato soup drifted through the open door and mixed with pine cold and wet wood. Elias thought of the way Marion used to say that every living thing knew the difference between a house that was warm and a house that was kind. He had not believed that after she died. For 2 winters, his home had been warm enough, but not especially kind. It held his habits. It held his silence. It held the green mug she had chipped and refused to throw away. Now a wild creature had been left on his porch in a frozen crate, and the house seemed to be holding its breath with him. Caleb bent to pick up the fallen spoon. He wiped it on his coat, realized that made no sense, and laid it carefully on the porch rail. "Should I call someone?" "Yes," Elias said. "Mara Bell, ranger station. Tell her it's a bobcat, alive, cold, and not to come in loud." Caleb nodded and reached for his phone, but his fingers were stiff enough that he pressed the wrong numbers twice. Elias noticed and said nothing. A man deserved privacy for his trembling. While Caleb called, Elias eased backward and reached inside the doorway for an old quilt from the hall bench. It was blue, patched at the corners, the one Marion had kept for power outages. He did not open the crate. He did not touch the animal. He only draped the quilt over the windward side, leaving the front wire clear, giving her shadow without stealing her view. The bobcat lifted her head. Her nose worked once, twice. She smelled him then. Soup, wool, wood smoke, grief, and a little peppermint from the candies he kept in his pocket, though he claimed not to like them. Elias sat on the porch beside the broken step, leaving distance between them. Snow collected on his slippers. Caleb stood at the rail with the phone to his ear, speaking softly as if he were in a library. For those settling in with this story, a gentle like or subscription helped keep quiet animal stories like this alive. And if the evening felt a little warmer, the porch would welcome a comment with where they were watching from, and the name of an animal that once left a mark on their heart. The bobcat made one more faint breath behind the wire. Elias heard it. Not as a promise, not yet, only as a beginning. Elias Mercer's life had moved by the sound of other people's mailboxes. For 36 years, he had known Birch Hollow by its hinges, latches, dents, and leaning posts. Elias had once been the postmaster for 3 small routes through Maine, and even after retirement, his mind still measured a day by delivery times. Morning began before the sun had chosen a color. Elias rose at 6, filled the kettle, fed the stove, and whistled once at the back door before stepping out. Not because anyone waited for him, because he had done it for so long that silence felt rude without it. His whistle was never a tune, just 2 low, uneven notes. The chickadees knew it, or Elias liked to believe they did. They crowded the feeder after he went inside, wings flicking snow from the rail. One little bird with a missing tail feather always landed first and acted as if he owned the whole county. Elias called him Judge, and when the bird scolded him, Elias lifted his chipped green mug toward the window and accepted the verdict. That was one small way he kept from becoming too quiet. The house was a narrow white place at the end of Birch Hollow Road. In January, the window corners furred with frost. The hallway smelled of pine boards, peppermint candy, and lavender sachets. Marion's garden boots still stood under the mudroom bench. Elias had moved them twice, only far enough to sleep beneath them, and both times he had put them back exactly as they had been. He was not a dramatic, lonely man. He paid bills on time. He shoveled before storms hardened. He drove into town on Wednesdays for coffee and seed cakes, and he always asked the grocer's daughter about her classes. He did ordinary things carefully, but grief lived with him in the carefulness. It was in the soup pot too large for one person, in the dish towels folded into thirds, because Marion had liked clean edges, and in the way he still set his boots toe out by the door, leaving room for hers beside them. Nothing in the house announced sorrow loudly. It simply made space for someone who no longer came in from the cold. Caleb Rusk had noticed, though he never said it plainly. Caleb was 42, broad-shouldered, red cheeks from the wind, and kind in the awkward way of men who would rather carry a heavy box than talk about sadness. He had taken over the rural route after Elias retired. Elias still noticed every mailbox flag, but he never corrected Caleb unless the mistake mattered. By their second winter, Caleb had learned to leave Elias's mail beneath the porch lantern when freezing rain made the steps slick. Elias had learned that Caleb liked black coffee with too much sugar and distrusted cookies with raisins. Once, during a storm, Caleb dropped catalogs into the snow and looked so defeated that Elias invited him in. They ate burnt toast over the sink. Caleb said it tasted like camping. Elias told him his standards were dangerously low. After that, Caleb stopped being only the mailman, not family, not quite a friend in the easy town way. Something steadier than that. He was the man who noticed when Elias did not pick up mail for 2 days. He was the man who brought the newspaper to the kitchen during a February freeze. He was the man who once replaced the mailbox flag with a red paint stirrer and 2 screws, then claimed it was temporary. Elias liked him for that. Still, the days were long at the end of the road. After Caleb's truck disappeared, the house often settled into a silence so complete that Elias could hear snow sliding from spruce boughs. Sometimes he stood at the kitchen sink and studied the tracks stitched across the yard. Deer, fox, snowshoe hare. Once, on a moonlit night, he had seen the small round prints of a bobcat near the woodpile. He had told no one. Wild things passed through his land without owing him their names. The woods had their own business. Elias respected it. He kept trash latched, chickens out of his plans, and distance in his heart. When raccoons tipped the birdseed bin, he muttered, but admired their clever hands. He had never believed affection gave a person rights over another living thing. Maybe that was why the crate on the porch disturbed him so deeply. It was not only that the bobcat was cold, It was that somebody had decided her wildness could be boxed, carried, and left for someone else to solve. That thought stayed with him as he sat on the porch, waiting for Ranger Mara Bell. Caleb had finished the call and stood near the steps, pretending not to stamp his feet for warmth. Snow gathered on his postal cap. He looked at the crate, then at Elias, then back at the crate. "She watching you?" Caleb whispered. "She's watching everything." The Bobcat's eyes moved behind the wire. She followed Caleb's wind-tossed sleeve, the swing of the porch light, the slow lift of Elias's hand around the green mug. She did not waste movement. Only her ears gave her away. When snow slid from the roof and landed in the yard, she flattened low so fast the blue blanket crackled beneath her. Caleb winced. Poor thing. Elias looked at him. Caleb corrected himself softly. Wild thing. That pleased Elias more than he expected. Inside the kitchen, the soup had begun to thicken. The radiator clanked as if irritated at being ignored. The porch lantern threw Caleb's shadow long across the boards, and the Bobcat stared at that shadow with such offended suspicion that Caleb tucked his arms tight to make himself less large. Elias almost smiled. Then he looked down at his slippers filling with snow, and knew Marion would have called him an old fool in the fondest possible way. He could almost hear her, not as a ghost, not as a miracle, only as memory warming one corner of the cold. The Bobcat breathed again, shallow but steady. Elias listened to that breath and felt the shape of his evening change. He had expected soup, radio weather, the sister's letter, and bed by 9. Instead, there was a crate on his porch, a ranger coming through ice, a mailman too worried to leave, and a wild creature whose eyes held stubborn life. For the first time in many months, the house behind him felt needed. Ranger Mara Bell arrived 22 minutes after Caleb called, though later Elias would remember it as both longer and shorter than that. Her truck came slowly up Birch Hollow Road, tires whispering over packed snow, amber light bar turning once against the dark spruce. She did not use the siren. She stepped out wearing brown field pants, a patched parka, and a wool hat pulled low over hair gone silver at the temples. In one hand, she carried a flashlight. In the other, a canvas medical bag with the zipper already open. Mara had worked those woods for almost 18 years. She knew that a wild animal in a crate was not a rescued thing yet. It was only trapped fear with a pulse. "Both of you stay where you are," she said quietly. Caleb obeyed so quickly his mailbag knocked against the porch rail. The Bobcat snapped her eyes toward the sound. Her body stayed low, but the end of her short tail gave one hard twitch, black tip cutting across the blue blanket like a warning mark. Mara noticed. "Good," she murmured. "Still has some fight." Elias stood near the door, the green mug cold in his hand. He had thought Mara's arrival would make him feel easier. Instead, seeing someone who knew what she was doing made the Bobcat's condition more real. The crate seemed smaller now, crueler. Ice had sealed one lower slat to the porch boards, and snow had packed beneath the wire. Mara crouched, but not directly in front of the crate. She angled her body sideways, as if making herself less of a wall. The flashlight beam stayed low, pointed at the boards, never into the animal's eyes. The Bobcat watched from beneath the quilt's shadow. Her torn left ear tilted toward Mara, then toward Elias, then toward the open door behind him. She was making a map of danger, Elias thought. Every person, every sound, every possible escape that was not really an escape. "Adult female," Mara said. "Thin, cold, maybe dehydrated. See that right shoulder?" Elias nodded, though he wished he had not seen it. "She's favoring it. Could be a strain, could be old trouble made worse by cold." Mara shifted slightly. "Any idea who left her?" "No," Elias said. Caleb glanced toward the road. There weren't tracks when I came yesterday, not that I noticed. Tracks won't last in this wind. Mara studied the crate, her mouth tight. Somebody may have found her in a barn or shed and panicked, thought leaving her with Elias was kindness. Elias looked down at the animal. Kindness should not come nailed shut. Mara did not answer, but her silence agreed. The next problem was the crate itself. The bottom had frozen to the porch, where melting snow had hardened into ice. Mara took a small pry bar from her truck, then wrapped its metal end in an old towel so the scrape would be duller. Caleb held the porch quilt aside with 2 fingers. Elias went inside and returned with a kettle of warm water, not hot, because Mara had told him warm, and because he liked rules when fear made his hands clumsy. He poured slowly along the porch board beside the crate. Steam rose into the porch light. The smell of wet pine lifted at once, sharp and clean. The bobcat's nose worked. One paw flexed, showing curved claws for a breath before she tucked them away again. She did not like the steam. She did not like the humans bending around her. She especially did not like Caleb's postal bag, which squeaked faintly every time he shifted. "Sorry," Caleb whispered to the bag, and then looked embarrassed. Mara's eyes flicked with amusement. Elias almost laughed, but swallowed it into a cough. The ice loosened with a soft crack. The bobcat flinched so hard, the crate rattled. Everyone froze. Mara waited until the animal lowered her head again. "Nobody rushes," she said. Those words settled over Elias in a strange way. Nobody rushes. He had rushed through the first year after Marion died, filling papers, fixing gutters, sorting clothes into boxes he later carried back from the truck and put in the hall closet. Then he had stopped rushing and become almost still. Now this creature had arrived between the two, demanding care without haste and feeling without ownership. When the crate finally came free, Mara tested each side. Caleb offered both hands, then pulled them back when Mara shook her head. "One person in front, one in back," she said. "No fingers near the wire. Keep it level. Elias, can your mudroom be cleared?" "It already is," Elias said, though it was not. He hurried inside and moved Marion's boots from beneath the bench. He set them in the kitchen with more care than the moment required. Then he slid the rug away and pushed a stack of seed catalogs into a corner. When he came back, Caleb was breathing through his nose like a man told to be calm by a dentist. Mara had taken the front of the crate. She nodded to Elias. He gripped the back slats through the towel. The wood was colder than metal. It seemed to burn his palms through his gloves. For a second, the bobcat's amber eyes met his. Close now, too close. He saw the pale scar across her muzzle, the broken right whisker, the small black spots along their forelegs, like ink pressed through fur. She made one sound then, so low it hardly became a growl. Not anger, warning. "I hear you," Elias whispered. They lifted. The crate rose from the porch with a grainy scrape, shedding snow from its underside. Caleb stepped back, holding the door wide with his shoulder. A flyer slid from his mailbag and landed face up in the snow, advertising oranges at the town market. The absurd brightness of the printed fruit sat there in the blue dusk, and even Mara's mouth softened. The bobcat did not thrash. She locked herself in place, all muscle and terror, her torn ear flat, her eyes never leaving Elias's boots. They carried her over the threshold into the mudroom. Warmth touched the crate, just enough to change the air. The bobcat lifted her nose again, catching wood smoke, soup, lavender, old wool, and the faint peppermint in Elias's pocket. Behind them, Caleb eased the door shut, as gently as if closing a sleeping child's room. Outside, the porch light kept swinging over the empty patch where the crate had been, and the mail lay forgotten in Caleb's bag. Mara Bell turned Elias's mudroom into a quiet borderland. She did not let anyone crowd the crate. She asked for towels, a shallow dish, a flashlight, and the quilt's dry corner. She asked for a broom, then used the handle to nudge the dish into place instead of sliding her hand near the wire. 3 feet, she said. Elias looked at the space between the crate and the door. For food, for you, for any kindness you think you need to give her. Mara set the dish down. With a bobcat, 3 feet can be the difference between help and panic. The mudroom smelled of wet wool, thawing ice, and potato soup drifting in from the stove. Snow melted from Caleb's boots in small dark crescents by the threshold. The bobcat crouched inside the crate, no longer pressed flat to the blanket, but not lifted either. Her torn left ear had risen halfway, listening. Every few breaths her nose pulled at the warm air, sorting it into pieces. Elias watched that nose and felt humbled. She knew more about the room than he did already. She knew which board held mouse scent near the wall. She knew Caleb had stepped in road salt. She knew the quilt had been stored with lavender. She knew Elias had peppermint in his pocket. She did not know Mercy yet. Mara mixed water with a little softened food from a pouch in her bag, making it loose and warm enough to smell stronger. The bobcat's pupils shifted. Her whiskers tilted forward, then snapped back when Caleb's mailbag gave its disloyal squeak. Caleb winced. I'm starting to think she and I got off wrong. Your bag did, Elias said. Caleb set the mailbag in the hallway. The bobcat watched it go as if she had won a legal dispute. It was the first small foolishness of the evening, and it helped the room breathe. Mara opened only the outer flap of the crate, not the inner wire panel. She pushed the dish just close enough for the bobcat to smell, but not close enough to force a choice. Then she backed away and sat on the bottom stair with her hands in her lap. Now we become furniture, she said. Elias, who had never been good at doing nothing when something suffered, found the instruction almost impossible. He wanted to fix the blanket. He wanted to warm the animal faster. He wanted to explain that nobody in that room meant harm. But the bobcat's eyes warned him that good intentions could still feel like teeth. So he sat on the kitchen threshold, 3 feet from the crate, with his cold slippers tucked beneath him and his green mug between his hands. Caleb stood for several minutes, then quietly removed his postal cap and held it against his chest. It made his hair stand in a flattened ridge, and Elias thought he looked like a startled schoolboy. The bobcat did not eat it first. She stared at the dish, then at Mara, then at Elias, then at the hallway where the mailbag had disappeared. Her short tail tapped once against the stiff blanket. After a long while, she stretched her neck forward without moving her paws, a cautious, almost offended reach, and sniffed. The room became very still. Outside, the wind dragged icy branches along the side of the house with a sound like fingernails on canvas. Somewhere beneath the sink, a pipe clicked. The bobcat's tongue appeared, quick and pink, barely touching the food before vanishing again. Caleb's eyes widened. Mara lifted one finger without looking at him. He held his breath. The bobcat waited, as if expecting punishment for having wanted something. When none came, she tasted again, this time a little longer. Then she withdrew and stared at Elias with such grave suspicion that he lowered his eyes to the mug. All right, he murmured. Your secret is safe. That became the lesson of the first night. Warmth was not a blanket thrown over fear. Kindness was not a hand entering a cage. Trust was not a debt the animal owed because people had worried over her. Help had to be placed down and stepped away from. Elias learned it badly at first. Once, when the bobcat shifted and the frozen edge of the old blanket crackled beneath her, he leaned forward before thinking. Her body went rigid. The growl came again, low and private, like thunder heard through soil. He stopped at once. Back, Mara whispered. Elias moved back, shame heating his face. "She doesn't know the difference yet," Mara said gently, "between reaching and taking." Elias nodded. He thought of Marion's last months, how many people had tried to be helpful, by arranging, deciding, speaking too brightly, touching too often. He remembered how she had once closed her eyes and whispered that everyone meant well, and meaning well was exhausting. The memory struck him with such quiet force that he had to look at the floor. When he looked up again, the bobcat was watching him. Not softer, not trusting, only watching. That was enough. By 9, Mara had checked what she could without handling the animal. The bobcat was cold, but warming, weak, but alert, injured, but not beyond hope. Mara would return before dawn with a larger transport kennel and advice from a wildlife veterinarian in Augusta. For the night, the mudroom would stay dim, quiet, and closed off from human worry. Caleb finally remembered the mail. He placed Elias's sister's envelope on the kitchen table, beside the spoon from the porch rail. "Want me to stay?" Elias looked toward the mudroom. The bobcat had tucked her chin down, though one amber eye remained open. "No," he said. "You've got a route tomorrow." Caleb nodded, then bent to retrieve his mailbag. The bobcat lifted her head at once. Caleb froze, held the bag out at arm's length, and sidestepped toward the door like a man carrying a sleeping hornet nest. Elias let out one small laugh. The bobcat blinked at the sound. After Caleb left and Mara drove away, the house settled into a different kind of silence. Elias washed the spoon. He turned off the kitchen radio before it could give the weather. He sat on the floor 3 feet from the mudroom door with the green mug cooling in his hands. Behind the door, a wild creature breathed. Elias did not ask her to forgive the world that night. He only stayed far enough away to let her believe he might. By morning, the storm had polished every branch white. Elias woke before the alarm, though he had slept in pieces, one ear held open by worry. The house was dim and blue. Frost feathered the kitchen window, and the old radiator ticked awake. Then he heard the faint scrape from the mudroom. Not frantic, just there. He rose carefully, pulling on wool socks before his slippers, because Marion's voice in memory still scolded him for stepping into winter floors barefooted. In the kitchen, he found the green mug beside his sister's unopened letter. Small, ordinary things had survived the night, and so, perhaps, had the creature behind the mudroom door. He filled the kettle. He waited for the first tremble of steam. Only then did he tap once on the doorframe with 2 knuckles, notice that he was coming. The bobcat answered with silence. Elias opened the door only wide enough to look in. The mudroom smelled of damp fur, thawed wood, wet towels, and the rich scent of the food Mara had left. The crate sat beneath the shelf where Elias kept boot brushes and a tin of spare screws. The quilt still covered one side. The dish had been pulled nearer to the wire, not spilled, but dragged in careful jerks until it rested against the crate. Elias studied that tenderly. She had wanted the food, but she had wanted control more. Inside, the bobcat crouched with her paws tucked beneath her chest, torn left ear angled toward him. Her amber eyes were clearer than the night before, still wary, still sharp. A few melted burrs had fallen from her shoulder onto the blue blanket. When Elias shifted his weight, her short tail tapped once. "Morning," he said. The word sounded too human for her, too neighborly, and he felt foolish. Then the bobcat sniffed, wrinkled her nose, and turned her head away with such regal dislike that he nearly smiled. Fair enough. Mara arrived just after sunrise, with a proper transport kennel, a thermal pad, and news from the wildlife veterinarian. They would not move the bobcat unless her condition worsened. Mara believed the least stressful thing was to let the animal warm, drink, and be observed in place. "She's stronger this morning," Mara said, kneeling sideways as she always did. She ate almost half, dragged the dish to herself. Smart girl. At that, the bobcat opened her mouth just enough to show the smallest line of teeth, Not a full threat, more a reminder that compliments did not grant permission. Mara chuckled under her breath, smart and opinionated. Caleb came late on the route with Elias's newspaper tucked under his coat so it would not freeze stiff. He had also brought 2 plain biscuits from town, 1 for each man. The mailbag stayed outside on the porch. I left the enemy at the door, Caleb whispered. Elias took the newspaper and looked toward the mudroom. She appreciates the sacrifice. From behind the door came a soft thump, as if the Bobcat had shifted at the sound of Caleb's voice. Both men stood listening like boys outside a principal's office. Nothing followed. Mara gave them each a task. Caleb cleared ice from the porch boards so the door would not stick. Elias warmed water and set out a second dish. Mara adjusted the room, moving the crate only inches, opening the quilt shadow on one side to give the Bobcat a view of the yard through the lower glass pane. That view changed something. The Bobcat lifted her head. Beyond the glass, the spruce line stood black and white. Chickadees flickered around the feeder. Judge, the tailless one, landed on the porch rail and scolded the world with his whole small body. The Bobcat's ears rose fully. Her pupils narrowed. For the first time, she looked less like an injured thing in a box and more like herself, a hunter trapped inside a pause she had not chosen. Elias saw it and felt the truth of her more clearly. She was not becoming his, she was enduring him. That distinction settled into him like a necessary kindness. Near noon, Mara stepped outside to call the veterinarian again. Caleb went to sort letters in the truck. Elias remained in the kitchen, the mudroom door cracked open, his chair placed 3 feet away. Snowlight lay across the floor in a pale rectangle. His biscuit sat untouched, except for one corner nibbled away by him without memory. The Bobcat watched him through the wire. Elias did not speak for a long while. He read 2 lines of his sister's letter, then stopped. She had written about a church supper and the coast icing over at low tide. Good news, small news, the kind Marion had loved. Elias folded the letter back along its crease. He missed telling someone the ordinary things. Without thinking, he gave the little 2-note whistle he used at the back door each morning. The Bobcat's head came up. Elias stilled. It had not been loud, barely more than breath shaped into sound. But she had heard it. Her torn ear pointed toward him. Her broken right whisker twitched. She stared as if the whistle had opened a narrow door inside the room. He did not repeat it. Some things lost power if asked for twice. The Bobcat held his gaze. Her body remained tucked, ready, suspicious. But her eyelids lowered once, slowly, not sleep, not surrender, not affection the way people wanted to name affection. It was a measured blink, cautious and brief, a small closing of the bright, guarded world between them. Then her eyes opened again. Elias felt his hand tighten around the green mug. In the kitchen doorway, Caleb had returned without either of them noticing. He had one boot still outside and one inside, mail in his hand, cold air slipping around his coat. He had seen it too. His face changed with the tender fear of a man witnessing something that might vanish if named. Did she just... Caleb began. Elias shook his head slightly. Caleb stopped. The Bobcat lowered her chin to the blanket, still watching from beneath her lashes. Elias looked down into his mug, where the tea had gone cold and dark. For the first time since the crate appeared, he allowed himself to feel something lighter than alarm. Not hope, perhaps. Hope was too loud a word. It asked too much of a wild animal and an old man. But there was a thread now, thin as breath, real enough to hold carefully. The name came on the 4th evening, though Elias never spoke it as if it belonged to him. By then, the Bobcat had been moved from the old porch crate into Mara's larger kennel. And then after 2 careful days of food, warmth, and watching, the kennel door had been opened toward the spruce line. Mara had stood beside Elias on the porch, with her hands deep in her parka pockets, both of them quiet enough to hear snow ticking from the branches. The bobcat had not leapt out. That seemed to be one of her ways. She did not accept freedom as a gift thrown at her feet. She inspected it. She tested the air with her nose, lifted her torn left ear toward the woods, then looked once over her shoulder at the house. Not at Elias, he reminded himself. At the house, at the porch light, at the smell of soup and wood smoke and human weather. Then she slipped out. No grand moment followed, no grateful glance, no soft approach. She flowed across the snow in a low, uneven line, favoring the right shoulder, but still carrying herself with fierce dignity. At the edge of the yard, she paused beneath the black spruce, touched one paw to the crusted snow, and disappeared so smoothly that Caleb, parked near the mailbox, whispered, "Where did she go?" Mara answered, "Where she was always going." That should have been the end of it. Elias told himself so while he washed the dishes. He told himself again while folding the blue blanket Mara had left for the porch in case the animal returned. He told himself while Caleb drove away and the tailless chickadees scolded the empty rail. A wild thing had gone back to the wild. The house had done what it could, but at dusk, when the sky lowered into a violet cold and the porch light began its small humming struggle, Elias heard the broken step creak. He was standing at the sink with Marion's green mug in his hand. He looked out through the frost-blurred glass. The bobcat stood at the far end of the porch. Snow dusted her whiskers. Her amber eyes caught the porch light and held it like two small lanterns. She did not come to the door. She did not cry or scratch or ask in any way a person might understand. She simply stood beside the folded blue blanket, nose lifted, as if checking whether the rules from the mudroom still existed outside. Elias set the mug down carefully. He warmed a little water, mixed food the way Mara had shown him, and placed the chip saucer exactly 3 feet from the door. Then he stepped back inside and closed it. The bobcat waited until the latch clicked. Only then did she eat. That became the beginning of their winter routine. Elias did not plan it, because planning made it sound like ownership. He merely kept the porch swept enough that the door could open. He set the blue blanket beneath the rail where the wind was weakest. He warmed water in the same small pan each evening. He used the chip saucer Marion had once kept under a geranium pot, because the bobcat had sniffed the Red Bull Mara offered and looked so offended that even Mara had laughed. "She has taste," Caleb said the next day. "She has standards," Elias corrected. "She has opinions about federal property, too," Caleb said, nodding toward his mailbag. The bobcat did. When Caleb arrived, she often watched from the spruce line or from beneath the porch bench, if she had come early. She never approached him. She never softened for him the way he secretly hoped. But whenever his mailbag squeaked, her torn ear flicked with such precise disapproval that Caleb began oiling the leather strap on Sunday evenings. "It's for public safety," he told Elias. Of course. By the second week, Elias had begun calling her Sable, but only indoors, and only when no one could misunderstand. The name came from the dark brush of fur along her tail and the shadowed spots across her shoulders. Mara heard it once and raised an eyebrow. "You know she won't come to it." "I know. You know naming her doesn't make her yours." Elias looked through the kitchen window at the porch, where Sable had left one perfect paw print in spilled seed dust. "That may be why I can say it." Daily life did not become exciting. It became steadier, which was better. Elias learned the difference between her hungry visits and her watchful ones. Hungry visits were quick. Sable appeared near dusk, stayed low, ate without turning her back fully to the door, and vanished before the porch boards stopped holding the sound of her paws. Watchful visits were longer. She sat near the blue blanket with her forepaws tucked, ears turning like little weather vanes, studying the yard as if it were a map she corrected every night. Sometimes she ignored the food until Judge the chickadee landed on the rail and made bold little noises above her head. Then Sable would glare upward, all wounded dignity, while the bird hopped twice and escaped into the cedar. Elias pretended not to enjoy that as much as he did. Once, during a soft snowfall, she pounced on a clump of snow sliding from the porch roof. She caught it with both paws, looked startled when it collapsed into powder, and immediately sat down with the expression of an animal who had meant to do exactly that. Elias was alone at the window and laughed so quietly his shoulders shook. Through it all, Elias felt something in himself relearn shape. He still missed Marion at the sink. He still set aside news to tell her before remembering. But now the day had a living edge to it. Dusk no longer meant only another lamp turned on for no one. It meant tracks around the porch, a saucer placed with care, and the possibility of amber eyes appearing just beyond the light. Sable remained wild. She came when she chose. She left without explanation. Elias found comfort in that. Love, he was beginning to understand, did not always enter the house. Sometimes it stayed outside in the snow, listened to your footsteps, and allowed you to be part of its weather. Caleb Rusk began stopping at the gate instead of the porch. He claimed it was because the lower steps still needed mending, and he had no wish to break his ankle delivering seed catalogs. Elias let him have that excuse for 3 days. On the 4th, when Caleb stood beside the leaning mailbox with his cap in both hands and his eyes fixed on the spruce line, Elias opened the kitchen window. "She is not signing for packages," Elias called. Caleb looked up, cheeks red from more than the cold. "I'm respecting boundaries. You're hiding from a bobcat who disapproves of leather goods." The snow had changed by then. It came in soft flurries that dusted the porch rail and melted along the kitchen glass. February light was thin and silver. It made every breath visible, and the yard seemed smaller, as if the woods had leaned in to listen. Sable had made a habit of appearing just before Caleb's truck arrived. Elias did not know how she learned the engine. Perhaps she felt the tires through the frozen ground, or read Judge's sudden flight from the feeder. However she knew, she would slip from the spruce shadows and settle beneath the porch bench, where the blue blanket lay folded. She never greeted Caleb. Greeting was too human a word. Sable observed him. She measured him. She watched the mail leave his hand and pass into Elias's keeping. If Caleb moved too quickly, her torn ear folded back. If he remembered to move slowly, she permitted his existence with solemn mercy. This became Caleb's favorite part of the route. He placed the letters on the gatepost, retreated 2 steps, and waited for Elias to come down the path. Sometimes there was nothing but advertisements and bills. Sometimes Caleb brought a paper bag with 2 cinnamon knots from the bakery, one for Elias and one he insisted was extra. Elias accepted the lie because kindness deserved a little privacy. On one bright afternoon, Caleb opened the bag. Warm sugar and yeast drifted into the cold. Sable, beneath the bench, lifted her nose. Her whiskers fanned forward. She did not come near, but her expression sharpened with such clear interest that Caleb froze. "No," Elias said quietly, "I didn't offer." "You thought about it." Caleb lowered the bag. "She has a powerful stare. She is a professional." Sable sniffed once more, decided humans were selfish keepers of pastry, and turned her head away. A bit of snow slid from the bench and landed squarely between her ears. She blinked, very slowly, as if the sky itself had been rude. Elias covered his mouth with his glove. Caleb turned toward the road and coughed. Those moments warmed the house without asking permission. One morning, Elias found delicate paw marks crossing the porch after a night of powder snow. Sable had circled the saucer, stepped onto the folded blanket, and placed both front paws on the lowest step. She had gone no farther. The prince stopped at the edge of the door and turned away. He stood looking at them for a long while, not because she had come close, because she had chosen not to enter. That restraint felt more intimate to Elias than any tame affection could have. He had spent 2 years in a house full of thresholds. Marian's chair by the window, her boots in the mudroom, the bedroom drawer opened only for clean sheets. He knew what it meant to stand before a place and decide how much of yourself could cross. So he left the paw prints untouched until the sun erased them. Caleb noticed. "You didn't sweep," he said. "No." "Because of the tracks?" "Because of the visitor." By late February, Caleb sometimes ate lunch at Birch Hollow Road, sitting on the bumper of his mail truck with a thermos between his knees. Elias leaned on the gate with his green mug. Sable remained at the spruce line, half hidden, pretending not to watch them share a sandwich in the cold. Once, Caleb dropped a mitten. It landed near the gate, palm up. Sable stared at it for so long that both men became aware of their own breathing. Then she emerged from the shadows in a low, fluid trot, stopped 3 feet from the mitten, and tapped it once with her paw. The mitten did not fight back. She hooked it with one claw, dragged it 6 inches, then sprang sideways when it folded over itself. Caleb pressed both hands over his mouth. Elias looked toward the trees, giving the bobcat the courtesy of not witnessing her surprise too directly. Sable collected herself, gripped the mitten by the cuff, and carried it under the porch bench. There she sat beside it, not playing, not chewing, simply possessing it with stern purpose. Caleb whispered, "That was my warm one." Elias said, "You had 2. She chose the better one. She has standards." For the rest of the week, Caleb wore 1 mitten and 1 brown glove from Elias's drawer. He complained just enough to make Elias smile. The stolen mitten appeared 4 days later on the porch rail, damp, flattened, and decorated with 1 spruce needle. No one saw her return it. Caleb held it up like an important letter. "She apologized," he said. "She issued a ruling," Elias replied. The mailman laughed then, a full sound that startled Judge from the feeder and made Sable's head rise beneath the bench. She did not flee. She listened, ears forward, eyes bright. He realized he had not heard that kind of laughter at the end of his road in years. The memory of Marian laughing in the doorway did not wound him the way it once might have. It arrived gently, sat beside him, and let the present have room. That evening, after Caleb drove away and the sky turned lavender behind the spruce tops, Sable came to the saucer early. Elias placed warm water beside it and stepped back inside. Through the window, he watched her eat, pause, and glance toward the road where the mail truck had vanished. Then she looked toward Elias. Not long, not softly, but without fear sharpening every part of her. Elias lifted the green mug in both hands. Sable lowered her head to drink, and the porch light hummed above them, tired but faithful, making a small circle of gold in the winter dusk. The house felt less empty that night. Not full, just less empty. For Elias, that was joy enough. The first warning came as a silence where a habit should have been. Elias had learned the sound of Sable arriving, though she made almost none. There was the faint settling of snow under careful paws, and the familiar complaint of the broken step when she crossed its corner. Most evenings, those small sounds came just after the chickadees abandoned the feeder and the spruce trunks turned black against the snow. On the last Thursday of February, there was nothing. Elias waited with the chip saucer warming between his hands. The kitchen window fogged at the edges, and the porch light hummed in its yellow halo. A wet snow had begun before dusk, heavy and slow, smelling of thawed bark and cold rain. It softened the yard, rounding every stump and rail, until Birch Hollow looked half-made. He told himself she was hunting. A wild bobcat did not owe an old man her schedule. Still, he stood at the sink longer than the dishes required, Caleb arrived late that day. Shoulders shiny with melting snow, mail tucked under his coat. He had brought Elias a seed catalog and a brown paper packet of molasses cookies from the bakery. A small kindness disguised as error. "She around?" Caleb asked, too casually. "Not yet." Caleb looked toward the spruce line. "Roads are bad. Maybe she's got more sense than us." "She usually does." They tried to smile at that, and the effort sacked between them like a cup set down too hard. When Sable finally appeared, it was not from the spruce line. She came from the far side of the woodpile, low and slow, her tawny coat clumped with wet snow. She paused twice before reaching the porch, and each pause looked less like caution than wariness. Her right shoulder, the one Mara had noticed in the crate, dipped with every third step. Elias felt the saucer tilt in his hands. Caleb saw it too. His face changed, the laughter leaving without a sound. Sable stopped under the porch bench and turned her head toward them. Her torn left ear lifted, but not high. Her broken right whisker was beaded with sleet. She did not crouch with her usual command of the place. She folded herself down slowly, as if each part of her had to be asked. "Should we call Mara?" Caleb whispered. "Not yet," Elias said, though the words hurt. He placed the saucer 3 feet from the door, the way he always did, and stepped back. Sable watched him through the snow, then sniffed and did not rise to eat. That troubled him more than the limp. Food had been their language when nothing else could be spoken. Warm water, a little softened meat, the saucer set down and abandoned. It had been respect made visible. If she refused it, either she needed nothing or something was wrong. Elias knew which one winter had taught him to fear. Through the glass, Judge landed on the porch rail, fluffed into a round feathered ball, and scolded Sable with theatrical outrage. Usually, she would flick her ear or glare upward as if the bird had violated several forest laws. This time, she only blinked slowly. The chickadee hopped closer. Sable gave one tired snap of her tail, not at the bird, but at the world in general. Judge flew off as though he had been deeply insulted. Caleb let out a small breath. "Still has some dignity." "She has more than both of us," Elias said. That earned a quiet smile, but it faded quickly. For the next several days, the signs came in small, deniable pieces. Sable ate, but less. She arrived, but later. Her tracks around the porch grew uneven, the right forepaw sometimes placed lightly, sometimes dragging a faint half-moon through powder. Once Elias found that she had stepped into the old enamel wash basin near the rail, left a perfect muddy paw print in it, and then apparently changed her mind about whatever plan required climbing into a basin. The absurdity of that print made him smile for half a minute before worry returned. Another evening, Caleb left a new mitten on the gatepost, not as an offering, he said, but because the route was missing its inspector. Sable came close enough to sniff it, sneezed once, and walked away with clear disapproval. Caleb looked wounded. "She rejected the color," Elias said. "It's gray." "She has known many grays and judged that one poorly." On Sunday, Elias warmed water and accidentally set the old spoon beside the saucer. Sable approached, sniffed the spoon, nudged it with one paw, and sent it sliding under the porch rail. Elias stood inside the door and murmured, "Marion agreed about that spoon." For a few seconds, his grief and his amusement sat together without fighting. But beneath those little moments, the quiet concern grew. Elias called Mara on Monday morning. Mara listened without interrupting. He described the limp, the late arrivals, the half-eaten food, the way Sable had rested under the bench longer than usual with her chin raised toward the woods. He found himself speaking carefully, avoiding words that sounded too possessive. "Not my Bobcat, not our Sable, only Sable, the Bobcat who comes by." Mara understood anyway. "I'll come out this afternoon," she said. "But Elias, if she's still mobile and alert, we may not be able to do much without making it worse. Stress can break what cold only bends." After he hung up, Elias stood by the counter with his hand still on the phone. He hated how sensible that sounded. He hated that love had so many locked doors. That afternoon, Mara knelt by the porch tracks and studied them in the pale light. The air smelled of spruce sap where Caleb had knocked snow from a branch. Sable watched from the tree line, invisible except for her eyes and the torn silhouette of her left ear. "She may have strained it hunting," Mara said, "or slipped on ice. Could be an old injury flaring. Can she heal?" "If she can rest." Elias looked at the woods. Rest was not a thing the wild promised. At dusk, Sable came to the porch again. She ate 3 careful mouthfuls, drank, and then sat facing the dark road instead of the forest. Caleb's truck had already gone. Snow gathered between her shoulders. The porch light trembled above her. Elias watched from the window and felt a fear he could not fix take its seat beside him. Sable lifted her head once toward the mailbox. Then she turned away. The ice storm arrived without drama at first. It began as a fine ticking against the kitchen glass, so delicate Elias mistook it for sleet falling from the roof. By noon, every twig in the lilac bush wore a clear sleeve. By 3, the spruce trees had stopped moving, sealed in place by shining weight. The world outside the porch light looked made of glass. Elias had spent most of the day listening. He listened to the radio, worn of falling limbs. He listened to the stove settle and hiss. He listened for the broken step, for the soft complaint of snow under careful pause, for any sign Sable had come before the weather worsened. Nothing came. Caleb called from town before he started the route. "They may pull us early," he said. "Roads are turning mean." "Then don't come out here." There was a pause. "You know I have mail for you. I have survived many years without coupons arriving on time." Very important coupons. Elias looked toward the porch, where freezing rain had silvered the rail. "Caleb," the mailman's voice softened. "I know. I'll be careful." The call ended, and the house seemed to grow larger around Elias. He warmed water, though Sable had not appeared. He set the chip saucer near the stove. He moved Marion's blue quilt from the hall bench to the chair by the door, then moved it back, annoyed at himself for fussing. Worry had hands, he thought. It kept picking things up. Near dusk, a sharp crack split the air. Elias turned so quickly the green mug bumped the sink. Somewhere beyond the woodpile, a branch came down with a muffled crash. Judge and the other chickadees burst from the feeder in a frightened scatter. Then came another sound. Not the branch, not the storm. A low scrape from the porch. Through the window, he saw Sable at the far edge of the light. She had come from the ditch, not the spruce line. Ice jeweled her whiskers. Her coat lay dark and wet along her spine. She paused beside the steps, lifted her right forepaw, and held it longer than usual before setting it down. "Sable," Elias whispered, though the glass kept the name inside. He opened the door slowly and placed the saucer 3 feet out, careful not to lean. The freezing rain touched his face like cold needles. Sable watched from beneath the rail, body low, torn ear twitching at every creak of ice above them. She did not eat. Instead, she turned her head toward the road. Elias followed her gaze. At the mailbox, Caleb's truck lights crawled through the storm. The truck stopped short of the gate, tires crunching over ice. Caleb stepped out with his mailbag held high against his chest, as if keeping it dry mattered in a world where trees were breaking. Sable's ears came forward. For one strange, tender second, Elias thought she had been waiting for him. Caleb lifted one gloved hand. "I made it. You shouldn't have. I brought the wrong coupons," Caleb called. trying for humor. His boots slipped on the first step from the road. He caught himself on the gatepost with a grunt. Sable flinched at the sound, then shifted backward under the bench. The mailbag squeaked. Even in that weather, with ice hanging from her whiskers and exhaustion in her shoulders, Sable flicked her torn ear in offended recognition. Caleb noticed and gave a breathless laugh. "Good to see you too, ma'am." That tiny courtesy almost broke Elias's heart. A gust came hard from the north. The porch lantern swung, light skidding across the boards. Above them, ice cracked along the maple limb that stretched over the left side of the porch. Mara had once told Elias that fear sometimes made a person see too much at once. He saw Caleb at the gate. He saw Sable beneath the bench. He saw the blue blanket folded near the rail. He saw the maple limb shudder. "Caleb, back," Elias said. Caleb heard the tone before the words. He stepped away from the gate just as the limb gave way. It did not fall cleanly. It tore through smaller branches first, breaking the storm open with a noise like furniture splitting in another room. The heavy end struck the porch rail, bounced, and crashed across the lower steps, sending ice and snow across the boards. Sable vanished into motion. There was no cry, no dramatic leap toward Elias. She shot from beneath the bench in a low streak, slipped on the iced plank, recovered with a twist that made Elias's breath catch, and bolted toward the yard. Sable! The name escaped him before he could stop it. She did not turn. Her tracks crossed the snow in an uneven line, right forepaw light, body driving hard despite the pain. She passed the woodpile, angled toward the ditch, then disappeared into the white blur beyond the mailbox. Caleb stood frozen by the gate, mail scattered at his feet. Elias started after her. His slipper hit the icy threshold and slid. Caleb lunged up the path, catching his arm before he fell. The two men stood there, breathing hard, while freezing rain tapped the fallen limb, the porch boards, the blue blanket, the chip saucer overturned in the snow. "Don't," Caleb said, voice shaking. "You'll go down." "She's hurt. I know. She's hurt and out there. I know." The repetition was not comfort. It was Caleb holding the only truth both of them could bear. For a moment, Elias hated the arm that held him back. He hated his age, his balance, the ice, the rules of wildness, the useless warmth of the house behind him. He had promised without words to do no harm, to keep distance, to let Sable choose. Now, distance felt like abandonment. Then Caleb bent and picked up the blue blanket from where the wind had dragged it halfway off the porch. A small, dark paw print marked one corner, already softening under the rain. Elias looked at it and said nothing. The mailbox flag, Caleb's red paint stirrer repair, clicked in the wind. A torn envelope slid across the ice and stopped against the fallen branch. Sable did not come back that night. Elias stayed by the kitchen window until the porch light burned gold around the empty crate mark still faint on the boards. Caleb stayed with him long after his route was forgotten, both men listening to the storm turn every familiar sound into something that was not her. By morning, the storm had stopped pretending to be weather and had become a weight. Ice sealed the porch rail in a clear, hard sleeve. Every spruce needle glittered under a pale sky, beautiful and cruel. Elias had not slept. Caleb had dozed once in the kitchen chair with his postal coat still buttoned and one brown glove on his left hand, Elias's old mitten on the right. His chin dipped to his chest, then lifted sharply when the stove popped. He apologized, though no one had accused him of anything. At first light, Mara Bell came up the road on foot because the lower bend had iced over badly enough to turn her truck sideways. She carried a coil of rope, a small field pack, and a thermos tucked beneath one arm. Elias met her before she knocked. "She didn't come back," he said. Mara looked past him to the empty porch, the overturned saucer, the blue blanket hanging from a chair back to dry. "Then we look," she said. They began at the porch. Mara crouched near the broken step, touching nothing at first. The storm had battered the tracks, but a few marks remained beneath the overhang. Sable's paw prints were smaller than fear had made her, rounded at the toes, with no claw marks showing except where she had slipped. Even hurt, even frightened, she had been a bobcat to the last clear print, keeping her claws sheathed until the ice took that choice from her. She went toward the ditch, Mara said. Caleb nodded too quickly. I saw that. You saw her after the limb fell? A blur, low, fast, not right. Mara accepted that. We spread out only where we can see each other. No shouting unless there's danger. Elias, you carry the lantern. Orange shows well if we set it down. Elias took the old barn lantern from the mudroom shelf. It smelled faintly of kerosene and dust. Marion had once filled it with battery candles during a power outage and called it history behaving itself. Caleb picked up the blue blanket. Mara looked at him. In case, Caleb said. She did not tell him no. The three of them moved down the iced path, past the mailbox leaning toward the ditch. The red paint stirrer flag clicked in the faint wind. Caleb paused to straighten it, then looked embarrassed. Habit, he muttered. Good habit, Elias said. The first warmth of the day was small as that. A crooked mailbox made straight, while everything else felt wrong. They found Sable's tracks beyond the gate, where wind had swept the road keen in patches. Here and there, her right forepaw had barely pressed the crust. Once, her body had brushed against a snowbank, leaving a tawny smear of loosened fur caught on ice crystals. Mara tucked the fur into a paper envelope. She was tired, Mara said. Elias heard what she did not say. They followed the ditch toward the lower bend. Birch Hollow Road dipped there between spruce and alder, and cold air pooled at the bottom with the smell of frozen mud. Caleb walked ahead, testing the ice with a fallen branch. Twice he slipped and recovered with a flap of both arms, so wild that a jay burst from the brush in offended alarm. Don't laugh, he said without turning. I was not, Elias said. You were thinking it. I was thinking Marion would have rated that a 7. Caleb's shoulders shook once, almost a laugh, almost a sob. Mara found the next sign near a culvert mouth, half hidden by ice. Not Sable, only scratches where an animal had tested the frozen lip and turned away. Bobcats preferred cover, hidden routes, and places where they could see without being seen. Sable had checked the culvert and refused it. She didn't like the sound, Mara said, pointing to water ticking beneath the ice. Elias imagined Sable, standing there in the storm, torn ear tilted toward that hollow clicking, deciding even exhaustion would not drive her into a tunnel that spoke back. That's her, Caleb whispered. They searched the culvert, the alder thicket, the woodpile edge, and the narrow deer path behind the old Wallace place. Mara found rabbit tracks, fox tracks, the little paired marks of a weasel crossing the road like a stitched thread. Once, Judge the chickadee followed them from tree to tree, scolding so fiercely that Caleb looked up and said, We're trying, sir. Then the bird flew off, and the quiet returned heavier than before. By noon, wet cold had entered Elias's knees. His gloves were stiff. His breath came shorter on the rises. Mara noticed and made them stop beside a stone wall, where the snow had drifted between the rocks. She poured coffee from the thermos into the cap and handed it to Elias first. He tried to refuse. Drink, she said. He drank. It was too strong and burned his tongue. Marion would have put sugar in it. Caleb would have put far too much. Elias held the cap in both hands and stared at the road curving away through the trees. Grief came back then, not as panic, but as recognition. He knew this shape, waiting beside a bed, listening between breaths, being told that care did not always mean keeping, being told gently and correctly that love could reach the edge of what it could do and still not be enough. He hated that lesson. He had learned it once. "We may not find her today," Mara said. Elias looked at the lantern set on the wall, its orange body bright against the snow. "We keep looking." "We do," she said, "but we keep sense with us." They searched until the afternoon light thinned and the woods turned the color of old tin. No bobcat rose from the brush. No amber eyes watched from the culvert. No torn ear appeared between spruce trunks. Only the road, the ditch, the frozen creek beyond it, and the tracks of animals who knew how to vanish without leaving brief and address. At dusk, Mara marked the last clear sign with a strip of orange tape on an alder branch. Caleb stood by the mailbox, empty-handed now, his route unfinished and forgotten. Elias placed the lantern on the ground beside the post. For a moment, all three listened. The winter woods answered with falling ice, far crows, and nothing else. Caleb found her because of the mail. That was what he told Mara later, though it sounded too ordinary for the weight of the moment. He had returned to Birch Hollow Road before sunrise, before the official route. He told himself he was checking whether the lower bend had thawed enough for the truck. He told himself Elias might need bread from town. The truth was that he could not stop seeing the blue blanket in his hands. A light snow had fallen overnight, soft enough to cover the harsh shine of ice, but not deep enough to hide the road. Caleb drove slowly with his window cracked, listening. The cold touched his cheek. His mailbag sat beside him on the passenger seat, oiled strap quiet now. When he reached Elias's mailbox, he stopped. At first, nothing seemed different. The red paint stirrer flag leaned slightly crooked again. The orange lantern Elias had left by the post had gone dim, but still stood upright, its casing frosted white. The ditch beyond the mailbox was shadowed in blue morning. Then Caleb saw the print, not on the road, on the top of the snowbank beside the post, where something had dragged itself into a hollow sheltered from the wind. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. Caleb stepped out with one hand on the truck door and one boot still on the running board. He did not call. He did not rush. A small cloud of breath rose from behind the mailbox. Caleb's whole body stopped. The hollow in the snow moved. There, curled against the wooden post, as if the leaning mailbox had become a poor kind of tree, was Sable. She had folded herself so tightly that her spots disappeared into shadow. Her torn left ear lay flat. Ice had dried along the fur of her shoulder, and her right forepaw was tucked beneath her chest. Her amber eyes were half open, not fierce now, not soft either, only deeply tired. But she was breathing. Caleb forgot his own breath when he saw hers. For several seconds he stood so still that the cold seemed to build around him. He had never felt more afraid of moving than he did beside that mailbox. Sable's nose twitched. Her eyes found him. Caleb lowered his gaze at once, staring instead at the red flag and the old screws he had driven in months before. "Morning, ma'am," he whispered. Her tail tip moved once beneath her body. Not greeting, not forgiveness, a sign that some part of her was still answering the world. Caleb reached slowly into the truck, took his phone, and called Elias first. His thumb hovered over Mara's number, but Elias was nearer, and the old man deserved to hear breath before instructions. Elias answered on the first ring. "She's here," Caleb said. For a moment there was no sound. Then Elias asked, "Alive?" "Yes," Caleb swallowed. "By the mailbox." The line changed, not with words, with a silence so full that Caleb could hear the kettle hiss in Elias's kitchen. "I'm coming," Elias said. "Slow," Caleb warned, surprising himself. "Bring the blanket. Call Mara. And Elias?" "Yes." "Shoes. Real shoes." There was one weak breath that might have been grief trying to stand. "Yes." Caleb ended the call and crouched beside the truck, not near Sable, but low enough that he did not loom. He opened his lunch pail with careful fingers. Inside were 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper and an apple. A bobcat did not need a bakery biscuit. Still, some human part of him wanted to lay down breakfast before fear. Instead, he took the little bottle of water he carried for long routes and tucked it beneath his coat to warm it. Sable watched every motion. When his sleeve brushed the mailbag strap, the leather gave the smallest creak. Her torn ear flicked. Caleb looked at the bag with weary tenderness. "You heard that, did you?" The bobcat's eyes narrowed. "All right," he said. "I'll file a complaint with myself." That tiny, foolish sentence steadied him. Elias came down the road on foot, with Mara beside him, both moving carefully over the packed snow. Elias wore heavy boots this time, his parka half-buttoned wrong, the blue blanket tucked under one arm, and the green mug somehow in his other hand. Mara had her field pack and a folded net she did not open. Sable heard them before Caleb did. Her ears shifted, her body tightened, but she did not rise. Elias stopped 10 feet away. The old man's face seemed carved from the same pale morning as the road. He looked at Sable, at the mailbox, at Caleb frozen beside the truck, and something in him broke open without making a sound. He did not speak her name. Mara went low, sideways, slow. She studied the bobcat from a distance, reading breath, eyes, posture, the small tremor along one foreleg. She came back to the last light, she murmured. Elias looked at the dim orange lantern beside the post. Not to the house, not to the porch, to the lantern, to the place where people had stopped searching because darkness had told them to. Caleb warmed the water bottle between his palms and handed it to Mara. She mixed a little with food from her pack and placed the shallow lid 3 feet from Sable, then withdrew. Sable did not move at first. Snow whispered from the mailbox roof and dusted her torn ear. She blinked. Slowly, painfully, she stretched her neck forward and touched the water with her tongue. Elias turned his face away, giving her privacy. Caleb did the same. Mara watched because someone had to. The bobcat drank twice, then rested her chin on the snow. Her eyes remained open, fixed now not on the woods, but on Elias's boots. Elias lowered the blue blanket onto the road between them, not touching her, not crowding her, only placing warmth where choice could find it. 3 feet, he whispered. Sable's eyes closed for one breath and opened again. The sun rose behind the spruce trees without color, but its first weak light reached the mailbox post. It caught the red flag, the frost on the lantern, the edge of the blue blanket, and the pale scar across Sable's muzzle. No one celebrated. No one dared. But Caleb began breathing again, and Elias stood beside him in the road, holding an empty mug with both hands, as if the smallest ordinary object could keep him from falling to his knees. Mara would not let them carry Sable back to the house, not at first. She made it this far by choosing every inch, Mara said, standing beside the mailbox with snow whitening her parka. If we take that choice from her too fast, she'll spend what little strength she has fighting us. Elias hated how quietly true that sounded. The morning air held that thin after-storm smell of ice, exhaust, and spruce needles snapped under weight. Caleb's truck idled behind them, heater running with both doors open, its cab spilling warmth into the road. The blue blanket lay between Sable and Elias like a small lake. The bobcat had lifted her head twice to drink from the shallow lid, and each time everyone looked away except Mara. Sable's pride had survived the storm. That mattered. Mara made a plan out of patience. She set the transport kennel on the road, not facing Sable, but angled toward the ditch so it looked less like a trap and more like another shadow. She lined it with the dry half of the blue blanket, then stepped back. Elias placed the chipped saucer near its entrance, and withdrew to the mailbox post. Caleb stood by his truck, trying to look like a tree, and failing. "She knows I'm not a tree," he whispered. "She has always known," Elias said. A tiny corner of Caleb's mouth lifted. Sable watched the kennel for a long time. Her torn left ear rose and fell with each small sound. The ticking engine, the lantern casing creaking in the cold, Judge scolding from high in the spruce as if the entire rescue lacked proper supervision. When a clump of snow dropped from a branch, Sable's right shoulder tensed and trembled. Elias saw the tremor and gripped the green mud harder. He had brought the mug without thinking, as if hands that held something familiar might not reach for what they had no right to touch. Its chipped rim pressed into his glove. Marion had once told him that a mug was useful in a crisis because a person could not wring their hands and hold tea at the same time. There was no tea in it now, only habit. Sable moved the last distance by inches. She gathered, paused, shifted her weight, then moved. Her forepaw touched the edge of the blanket. She stopped and looked at Elias. His whole chest tightened. "I'm here," he said, too softly for the words to demand anything. She entered the kennel because warmth waited there and because the door remained open until she had chosen. Mara closed it gently, only after Sable had lowered her chin. The click of the latch was small, but Elias felt it in his bones. Sable's eyes opened. Mara spoke at once, low and steady. "Only for healing, girl. Only for healing." They took her to Elias's mudroom, because it was already a place she knew. Caleb carried one side of the kennel, and Mara the other. Elias walked ahead, cleary nice with the heel of his boot, ashamed that he could offer so little, and grateful for the little he could offer. Inside, the mudroom had been warmed before dawn. Elias had moved Marion's boots back to the kitchen again, apologizing to them under his breath. He had laid towels along the floor, shut the hallway door, and set the porch lantern on the shelf without lighting it. The room smelled of wood heat, damp wool, and peppermint candies he had poured into a bowl because he feared the wrapper crinkle would startle her. Caleb noticed the candies. "You admitting you like those now?" "They are medical supplies." "For who?" "For morale." Caleb nodded solemnly. "Important category." Sable opened one eye at their voices. Her torn ear flicked, not with panic this time, but with weary irritation. Even exhausted, she seemed offended by unnecessary conversation. Both men quieted at once, which Mara found satisfying. Over the next days, healing became a series of small permissions. Mara came morning and evening. The veterinarian in Augusta advised rest, warmth, fluids, and watchfulness unless Sable worsened. There was no dramatic treatment, no miracle touch, no sudden cure. Her shoulder appeared strained rather than broken, her strength thinned by cold and the long night outside. The cure was not bravery. It was time. Time was harder than bravery. Elias sat 3 feet from the mudroom door and read old seed catalogs aloud in a low voice, because the rhythm seemed to matter. He discovered she disliked the word rutabaga. At least, every time he said it, her tail tip twitched. Caleb began leaving mail on the kitchen chair and standing in the doorway with his bag held behind his back like a guilty child. Once, Sable sniffed when he arrived and then closed her eyes again. Caleb looked honored. Mara taught Elias to mark the saucer with a pencil line so they could know how much Sable drank without staring at her. She taught him to enter, place, retreat, and wait. She reminded him that recovery in a wild animal often looked like rejection. "She turns away because she can," Mara said. "That's a good sign." Elias carried that sentence around all day. Sable turned away from food, then later ate it when no one watched. She shoved the towel into a corner, then slept against the bare wooden side of the kennel, as if softness were suspicious. She hooked one claw through Caleb's gray replacement mitten when it slipped from his coat pocket, pulled it halfway inside the bars, and rested her chin on it only after he left. Caleb found out the next morning and looked as if he had been given a medal. "You're not getting it back," Elias said. "I wasn't going to ask." On the fifth evening, Sable stood inside the kennel, only for a moment. Her right forepaw touched down carefully, her shoulder held stiff, her pale muzzle lifted toward the window. Outside, the porch light glowed through falling snow. Judge landed on the rail and scolded the glass. Sable's ears came forward. Elias, sitting on the floor with the green mug beside his knee, did not move. Joy rose in him so sharply it almost became pain. He had learned not to cheer at wild healing. A cheer belonged to people. Sable needed quiet. So he looked down at his hands and let the moment pass through him. She had returned from the edge, not to belong to him, but to continue being herself. That was enough to fill the whole room. Spring did not arrive at Birch Hollow all at once. It came first as water moving under the ditch ice with a little chuckle. Then it came as mud along the driveway, soft enough to steal Caleb's boot one Tuesday morning, and hold it so firmly that he had to hop on one foot while Elias leaned on the gate. "Take your time," Caleb said. "I'm respecting the natural process," Elias replied. Judge the chickadees scolded from the feeder, disappointed in both men. By then, Sable had been gone from the mudroom for nearly 3 weeks. Mara had opened the kennel on a mild afternoon when the snow along the porch steps had begun to slump and darken. Sable had stepped out slowly, shoulders still careful but stronger, and paused at the threshold. The blue blanket lay folded under the rail. The chip saucer sat dry beside the door. Elias stood in the kitchen with both hands around the green mug, because he had promised himself he would not make the porch a place of pleading. Sable looked once toward the spruce lime, then she looked back. Her amber eyes rested on the door, on Caleb's mailbag far away by the gate, on Elias behind the glass. Her torn left ear lifted into the thawing wind. She did not blink. She did not offer a farewell that could be made into a human story too easily. She crossed the porch, stepped over the broken board, and returned to the woods. After that, Elias kept the routine smaller. Warm water only on hard nights. No food unless Mara advised it. No calling. No waiting in the doorway. He let the porch become porch again, and the woods become woods. Still, each evening he noticed the tree line. Love had trained his eyes. On the second Saturday of April, the air smelled of wet leaves and old snow. Elias was repairing the broken porch step, kneeling with a hammer, a coffee can of nails, and more confidence than skill. Caleb had stopped by with ginger cookies and a promise not to supervise. He supervised. "That board's crooked," Caleb said. "So is the mailbox. The mailbox has charm. This step has history." A rustle came from beyond the woodpile. Both men quieted. Sable stood at the edge of the spruce shadows. For a moment, the yard seemed to gather itself around her. Her coat was leaner now, tawny against the dark wet trunks. The pale scar across her muzzle showed in the spring light. Her right shoulder no longer dipped with every step. She looked at the men as she always had, not warmly, not coldly, but with the authority of a creature who had decided they were part of the landscape and still needed monitoring. Elias set the hammer down. Caleb lowered the ginger cookies as if guilty of possessing them. Sable's ears turned toward the spruce behind her. Then 2 small shapes appeared. They were not much larger than house kittens, but their legs were longer, their paws already too serious for their bodies. Their spotted coats were soft with baby fuzz, tawny gray over round bellies. One had a darker stripe down the nose. The other wore a pale smudge above one eye that made it look permanently puzzled. They tumbled out from behind a wet fern, stopped, and stared at the yard with amber eyes. Caleb made a sound that was not a word. Elias forgot the hammer, the step, the ache in his knees, and for one breath, even his own name. Sable turned her head sharply toward the kittens. The darker-nosed one sat down immediately, as if corrected by thought alone. The pale-smudged one took one extra step, placed a tiny paw on a rotting leaf, and startled itself when the leaf stuck to its toes. It shook its paw twice, with great seriousness. Caleb pressed both hands over his mouth. Elias looked down because laughter felt too large for the moment. Sable heard it anyway. Her torn ear flicked. The pale smudged kitten pounced on the leaf after deciding fear had been unnecessary. The darker-nosed kitten watched, then pounced on its sibling instead. Both vanished briefly into brown grass, reappeared, and froze when Judge landed on the rail with a loud chickadee scold. The kittens looked up. Judge looked down. For 3 seconds, a bird the size of Elias's thumb appeared to hold legal authority over the entire Bobcat family. Then Sable gave one chuff, barely audible. Both kittens scrambled back toward her so quickly that one rolled over its own feet. Sable lowered her head and touched each of them with her nose, firm, checking, counting, claiming. Her body stood between them and the porch, between them and the road, between them and every kindness that could become danger. Elias understood then why she had fought the storm so fiercely. It had not been only hunger, not only memory, not only the porch light or the saucer or his 2-note whistle. Somewhere in the hidden dark of late winter, life had been waiting for her to return to it. His throat tightened. Marion had once wanted grandchildren. They had never come, and she had carried that absence gently, making room for other small lives instead. Seedlings on the windowsill, neighbor children on Halloween, every injured bird Elias brought home. In the muddy yard, Elias felt the old sorrow open, then change shape. These were not his to name or hold, but the world had still placed new life where his porch light could reach it. That was a mercy of its own kind. Caleb whispered, "Two." Elias nodded. "Did you know?" "No." "Does Mara know?" "Not yet." Sable looked at them both as if Mara would be informed only if Sable found it necessary. The darker-nosed kitten took a wobbling step toward the blue blanket folded under the porch rail. Sable blocked it with one silent movement of her shoulder. The kitten bumped into her leg, blinked, and sat down. The pale smudged one tried to chew a spruce needle and immediately regretted the choice. Caleb's eyes shone. They have her standards. They are developing them. No one moved closer. No one reached for a camera. No one called out. Elias only lifted the green mug in both hands and stood beside the half-mended step, while Sable gathered her kittens back into the spruce shadows. Before she vanished, she looked once at the porch light, though it was not yet on. Then she led the small spotted shadows into the trees, and spring went with them. By May, Birch Hollow Road had turned green at the edges. The snow retreated into the deepest shade, leaving the ditches wet and shining. Ferns uncurled beside the old stone wall. The porch boards dried to a pale gray, and Elias finally finished mending the broken step, though Caleb insisted the repair leaned slightly west. "It has character," Elias said. "It has direction," Caleb answered. Judge the chickadee remained unimpressed with both men. Sable did not come every day anymore. That was how Elias knew the season had truly changed. Winter had made the porch useful. Spring made the woods generous again. Mice moved through grass. Rabbits left fresh trails near the alder. The spruce shadows filled with rustling life, and Sable belonged to that world more completely than she belonged to any circle of porch light. Still, she returned often enough to keep the house listening. Sometimes, Elias saw only her tracks in the soft mud beyond the woodpile. Sometimes he found the shallow dent where she had rested beneath the porch bench while he was in town. Once, on a foggy morning, he discovered Caleb's old gray mitten placed neatly beside the repaired step, flattened and damp, as if Sable had decided the household inventory needed review. Caleb held it up with great ceremony. "She remembered me." "She remembered the mitten," Elias said. "That's close. For a bobcat, perhaps." The two kittens grew bolder by inches, never by leaps. Mara had advised distance, so Elias and Caleb kept it faithfully. They did not feed the kittens. They did not coax them. They did not give them names aloud, though Caleb privately called the darker-nosed one Captain and the pale-smudged one Button until Elias warned him that secret names still counted if spoken with that much affection. Caleb denied affection immediately. Then Button tried to climb a fern and slid down backward, and Caleb had to turn toward the truck until his laughter passed. Sable always watched their watching. That was her law. She allowed the kittens to explore only the far edge of the yard, where the spruce roots rose like old knuckles from the moss. If one strayed too near the porch, Sable crossed its path with silent authority. If Caleb shifted his mailbag, both kittens froze, and Sable's torn left ear angled toward him with familiar judgment. Caleb had oiled the strap so thoroughly by then that the bag made no sound at all. "She has improved federal equipment," he said. "She has improved you," Elias replied. The comment came out softer than he intended, and Caleb pretended to study the mailbox flag. The mailbox had become a small landmark in all their lives. Elias kept the orange lantern on the ground beside it, unlit now, its casing faded from weather. He did not move it. Caleb straightened the red paint stirrer flag whenever it leaned. Mara checked the ditch near it on her rounds, sometimes leaving boot prints beside bobcat tracks, two kinds of guardianship crossing without fuss. On mild evenings, Elias sat on the porch with a green mug and listened to the woods settle. The air smelled of damp cedar, warm mud, and the faint sweetness of Marion's lilacs beginning to bud by the side fence. He no longer placed food unless Mara told him a hard night or injury made it wise. Instead, he left the porch as a quiet place, not a pantry, not a trap, not a claim. Sable seemed to understand that better than any human could have. She came once during a soft rain and sat beneath the rail while water ticked from the gutter. The kittens wrestled near the spruce line, rolling over each other with tiny, fierce seriousness. Captain pounced on a pine cone, bit it, regretted the taste, and shook his head so dramatically that Button startled and leapt sideways into a patch of violets. Elias smiled into his mug. Sable looked back at him. Her eyes were steady. Not tame, never tame, but the old sharp panic had eased from them, replaced by something quieter and more complicated. Recognition, perhaps. Tolerance deepened by memory. A wild creature's version of allowing. Elias had learned not to decorate it with human wishes. That learning had changed him. Before Sable, he had thought grief was a room that had to be kept exactly as it was. Marion's boots under the bench, her quilt folded the same way, her chip saucers untouched except for dusting. He had mistaken stillness for loyalty. But the house had shifted without betraying anyone. Marion's blue blanket had warmed a bobcat. Her saucer had held water under winter's stars. Her porch had become a threshold between human sorrow and wild survival. Nothing had been taken from her memory. Somehow, more had been added. That truth settled in Elias gently. One afternoon, Mara found him planting marigolds near the porch steps. "Marion's?" she asked. "Every year," Elias said. "You move them closer to the rail." He pressed soil around a small green stem. "Better light." Mara looked toward the spruce line, where two small spotted faces vanished badly behind one thin sapling. "Better view, too," she said. Elias did not deny it. Daily life became wide enough for all of them. Caleb still delivered bills and seed catalogs. Elias still burned toast more often than he admitted. Judge still scolded the feeder as if running a court. Mara still reminded everyone that bobcats were not neighbors in the usual sense, only wild lives passing near enough to be respected. And Sable still chose. Some nights she chose the woods completely, and the porch stayed empty beneath the stars. Some mornings she crossed the road before Caleb's truck arrived, kittens following in clumsy little bursts, tails stiff with concentration. Once, she paused by the mailbox and touched her nose to the old lantern. Caleb saw it from the bend and stopped the truck so gently that even the brakes seemed to whisper. He did not breathe until she moved on. Later, he told Elias, she checked the light. Elias looked at the lantern, then at the spruce shadows beyond the ditch. Maybe she remembered where we stopped, or where she came back. They stood there together, saying nothing more. At dusk, Elias turned on the porch light. Its yellow circle spread over the mended step, the empty saucer, the marigolds, and one faint paw print drying in the mud. The house was still quiet, but it was not empty in the same way. Years later, when people in town asked Elias Mercer whether he still saw the bobcat, he usually answered in the same careful way. Sometimes, he said, it was true enough, and it protected what mattered. By then, Birch Hollow Road had weathered through many seasons. The repaired porch step had faded until the newer board no longer stood out. The marigolds returned each spring in uneven rows because Elias planted them by hand and never measured properly. The old orange lantern beside the mailbox had lost more paint, but Caleb still brushed snow off it whenever winter came. The mailbox itself still leaned toward the ditch. Caleb had replaced the post once, digging the hole with great ceremony and declaring the structure finally straight. The first frost heave tilted it again before Christmas. Elias said nothing for 3 full days, which Caleb considered unkind. Sable did not come as often after her kittens grew. That was the right thing, Mara reminded them. The woods had room for bobcats. People had porches. Lines mattered. Love, if it had any wisdom, learned not to erase them. Still, there were signs. A paw print in early snow near the woodpile. A pale whisker caught on the rough bark of the lower spruce. The brief shape of a spotted body crossing the road at dusk, low and silent. Gone before Caleb's headlights fully found it. Once, in late October, Elias saw 3 bobcats near the stone wall. Sable stood in front, older now, her torn left ear still distinct against the brown leaves. Behind her moved 2 younger cats, sleek and restless, no longer foolish kittens pouncing on pine cones. One paused to sniff the air toward the house. Sable turned her head, and the younger one followed her into the trees. Elias stood at the sink with the green mug in his hands, and felt no ache of wanting them nearer. That surprised him. There had been a time when absence felt like punishment. Now it could feel like proof that something had healed. Caleb still stopped at the gate when the weather was bad, not because the route required it, not because Elias needed checking every time snow came down. He stopped because some habits began as duty and became affection before anyone admitted it. On one January evening, snow fell in large, soft flakes, covering the road so gently that even tire tracks looked forgiven. Caleb arrived just after dusk with a padded envelope from Bangor, a bakery bag, and a new pair of wool mittens he claimed had been accidentally purchased in Elias's size. "You are a terrible liar," Elias said. "You are a difficult customer." The porch light hummed above them. The blue blanket, older and thinner now, rested folded on the bench, no longer left as bait or bedding, only kept there because some objects earned their place. The chipped saucer sat on the shelf inside the mudroom, clean and dry. Elias had not used it for months, but he had never put it away. Caleb handed over the envelope, Then he looked past Elias toward the spruce line. Elias followed his gaze. At first there was only snow. Then a shadow shifted beneath the lowest branches. Sable stepped into the edge of the porch light. She was thinner than she had been that first winter, and her muzzle had silvered slightly around the pale scar. Her amber eyes remained clear. Her torn left ear lifted toward the men. She did not come to the porch. She did not approach the saucer that was not there. She simply stood in the snow beyond the marable bed, watching. Elias did not move. Caleb slowly lowered the bakery bag, as if cinnamon knots might be considered suspicious. For a long moment, the three of them remained as they were. The old man on the porch, the mailman by the gate, the wild mother at the edge of the trees. Then Elias gave the two-note whistle. Low, uneven, barely more than breath. Sable's ears came forward. She did not come closer, but her eyelids lowered once, slow and deliberate, the same cautious blink she had given in the mudroom when fear still filled every corner of her body. Elias felt the years fold softly around that small gesture. Caleb looked away first, giving both of them the privacy of it. He busied himself straightening the mailbox flag, though it was already straight enough. Elias kept one hand on the porch rail and let the cold settle on his sleeve. Sable turned toward the woods. Before she vanished, she paused beside the old lantern at the mailbox. She lowered her head and sniffed the frosted metal. The red flag clicked once in the wind. Snow gathered along her back. Then she crossed the ditch and disappeared between the spruce trunks, silent as breath leaving a room. Caleb stood very still. She checked the light again, he said. Elias nodded. She remembered. Neither man said what she remembered. Maybe the storm. Maybe the place she had returned to when her strength had thinned to almost nothing. Maybe nothing in the human way at all. Maybe the lantern simply smelled of road salt, old hands, and winter survived. It did not need explaining. That night, Elias went inside and placed Caleb's bakery bag on the counter. He opened the envelope from his sister and read it beside the stove. She wrote about the harbor freezing late, about a church supper, about a neighbor's old dog who had taken to sleeping beneath the piano. Ordinary news. He loved it more than he once would have. Before bed, Elias stood in the mudroom and looked at Marion's boots beneath the bench. They were still there, dusty, softened with age, exactly where they had always belonged, and not at all the same as before. Beside them sat his heavy winter boots, Caleb's spare brown glove, and the chipped saucer. The house held the past without closing around it. Outside, snow kept falling over the mended step, the porch rail, the lantern, the mailbox, and the faint trail leading back toward the woods. Elias turned off the kitchen light. He left the porch light on, not to call Sable home, not to keep anything wild from going where it needed to go, only because once, on the coldest night of his later life, a living creature had found breath near that light, and 3 people had learned how much tenderness could exist without possession. In the quiet after midnight, the porch light made a small golden circle on the snow. It shone over the place where the crate had first rested, over the repaired board, over the empty space beneath the bench. The wind moved softly through the spruce trees, and somewhere beyond them, unseen and unowned, wild paws crossed the dark. The story of Elias, Caleb, Mara, and Sable did not end with anyone holding on. It softened into tracks that appeared and vanished, into a lantern brushed clean after storms, into a green mug warmed between old hands, into a mailman who learned to stand still when wonder came near. Some bonds never asked to be kept inside. Some love stayed outside the door, looked once through the falling snow, and trusted that it had been understood. For anyone still here at the end, let the room grow quiet now. Picture Birch Hollow Road after snowfall, the leaning mailbox, the faded lantern, and the porch light humming above a clean white step. Picture Elias standing by the window with his green mug, not waiting sadly, but listening kindly. Picture Caleb's truck rolling slowly past the gate, careful as a whisper. Picture the spruce line, holding its secrets without cruelty. Sable was never a pet. She was never a tame miracle. She was a wild mother who survived a frozen crate, an ice storm, a night by the mailbox, and the difficult mercy of being helped without being claimed. That was why the memories stayed warm, because the people in that little house learned the gentlest kind of love, the kind that placed water 3 feet away, the kind that looked aside when pride needed privacy, the kind that left a light burning, not to summon, but to honor. Thank you for staying beside this porch until the snow settled. May your own night feel a little softer. May the animals you have loved, lost, rescued, watched, or simply remembered find a quiet place in your heart. And may some small light remain on for them somewhere in the dark. Outside Birch Hollow, the snow kept falling, and beyond the last warm window, one silent bobcat track slowly filled with moonlit white. End of story. Sleep gently, friends.